A warm welcome to everybody for this second installment of our webinar. This afternoon we're going to be looking at the data governance strategy and planning stages, where in this particular seminar we're going to follow up on the previous content by looking at how we can keep the momentum going and build up the practice for your good governance practices in here. And just like before, we're going to have our colleague present here, Dennis Slattery. Dennis, if you want to just flip over to the next slide. And Dennis will be joining me. And my name is Jog Raj, and I'm one of the senior consultants here at Sandhill. And Sandhill, as we said before, is one of the partners for Irwin, and we've been partnering with them for many, many years. We offer multiple lines of support for the various products we've got, plus consultancy and technical support, etc. in there. And Dennis, do you want to go to your next slide and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Jog. So Dennis Slattery is my name, 30 years background in data management, and I run an advisory and consultancy practice called EDM Works. My background is primarily as lead architect and project lead on several large data projects in different sectors of investments and banking. And as I mentioned now, the primary task that I get involved in is advisory work on data governance, strategy and implementation. So a brief intro into, or just very brief contents, coverage of the contents. That's the contents page just taken straight from the website. Not going to go through it now. Exactly as Jog said, this is the second part of a two-part webinar, and this is all about what we do with our strategy, having set it up, and how we need to focus on different aspects of it to get it driven forward. Some of those are things like we need to focus on it being a process, not a project, because governance is very much part of setting the whole organization up so that it gets itself into a state of continuous sustainable innovation, so we can deal with challenges, deal with change, and make sure that we can continue to innovate, move forward, restructure processes, get rid of legacy, all that sort of stuff. It's a process, not a project. So what we'll do shortly is just look at the different quadrants of the data governance framework that we introduced in the last webinar, and look at how we will drill into different parts of that to make sure that we are building momentum and getting up speed. Just a quick recap from the previous webinar. The first thing we did was, if you're starting a governance strategy, step back. Take a big look take a helicopter look at the organization. Think about who the external stakeholders are. So you've got customers, you've got your shareholders, you've got regulators who need information from you. You've got people who are providing you with information, external data providers. Then you've got a whole series of processes inside that are delivering the information that those people want, and all of that is based on data. So data is at the heart of the organization, and the challenge we have from governance is taking data from lots of different places, integrating it, and then aggregating it and delivering it to different people. We made one important statement, which is to say that trusted data is the natural outcome of an organization that has the necessary capabilities in terms of people, leadership, staff, systems, processes, and governance and controls. Now, in order to create that sort of organization where data just naturally flows as good data instead of being bad data, which is an impediment, we talked about a governance framework with 4 quadrants. There's an executive component, there's an operating model of processes and technology, there's core data management capabilities, and then there's a big focus on people. So what we're looking to do is construct a framework and develop the organization around that framework so the organization is capable of producing trusted data. To do that, we need a plan. So we talked about a 3-stage plan of proving the concept. Second stage was building foundations, and third step was scaling up. We needed to pick a sensible first project, and I'll just review this in a bit more detail in a moment. So to pick a sensible first project, which is end-to-end and challenging enough, but not too challenging that it kills you, and then come up with the initial 6 to 8 week first phase, whereby you set up multi-work streams So you've got a stream that deals with setting up the data governance framework itself, a system strategy work stream that's explaining how the big picture will fit together on systems, the system build technology, and then the fourth one is about people, capabilities, values, and culture, so that you're continuously developing all the different strands of your data governance framework that you need to do. We talked about pick a sensible first project. This is based on various examples that I've used in the past. Quick run through of this one. So you've got customer facing activity. This is about the bank, home loans. You've got retail customers within the organization, the grey box here. You've got customer facing divisions for home mortgages and personal loans. You've got a series of back end functions here for HR, risk, finance and treasury, and these functions, they're having to deal with the regulators. They're having to deal with data that they've had to collect and aggregate from front-end production systems around mortgages and loans, and they've had to do that through the operations groups, as well as some marketing analytics and then product innovation functions that are going on as well. The indicative architecture that we sort of looked at for our proof of concept had some important things. The first thing, it had more than one input system, because the reality of most organizations is there are multiple production systems that are generating the data that you have to deal with. And from a governance point of view, we have to get governance around that. Otherwise, there is anarchy and there is chaos. So we need to get the data from our core production systems, in this case the two boxes called mortgage systems. We need to get it into some sort of integrated cleansed repository, and in order to do that we have to master the data. So mastery is dependent upon some sort of matching capabilities and really solid reference data. So wherever you go, core reference data absolutely comes back. And then we need some aggregation analytics capability that does the different types of reports. One, the risk and regulatory reporting for the regulators, and the other is customer marketing activity, because what we're looking to do with our proof of concept is do something that works for one stakeholder but delivers a benefit to other stakeholders. And the more stakeholders you can satisfy through proof of concept and your data management projects, then the better it will be. The final piece over there just summarizes what I've already said. End-to-end product, a few critical data elements, not too many. So let's have a look at what we mean by that in a bit more detail, and what we're going to use as the context for today's webinar. We've got the business diagram on the top left. Underneath we've got this hierarchy of, which is titled loan to value. And what we're going to do for the rest of this webinar is just talk about what look like three simple attributes, but in fact are anything but simple. So we're going to take loan, we're going to take value, and then the ratio loan to value, the derivation of those two underlying ones. Now, whilst there's a general understanding of loan to value, and anybody who's bought a property or bought any asset will be familiar with the fact that the bank always wants to know the amount of the loan and the value of the asset, and that gives them the risk measure that they're exposed to. But there are many variances on that. So there's temporal factors. So for example, there is the original loan to value. There may be an event that will cause them to have to go and get a current loan to value, because it may be you now want to build a huge extension on it. So they now need to reassess that. But more normally, the bank every month will have to reassess its overall risk, and it can't revalue every asset that it's loaned money on, so it uses indices. So it will use property indices or car sales indices or whatever it might be to index up the value of or down of the various assets that are holding, look at the loans that are there, and some of the loan may have been repaid, so the loan to value is in fact quite a dynamic thing, and according to what you want, then you must be more specific about what you want, rather than just I don't want loan to value. It's got to be original, current, index, and there are various other variances as well. And then the complexity of the calculation involved in that will also vary across business sector. So in the retail sector, it's relatively straightforward around a single asset, and there are readily available property benchmarks or car sales indices that are around. On a commercial loan, it will be much more complex, because if it's, for example, a shopping centre with 50 different shops, then there's a variation on rental income, there's variations on all sorts of different things. So the calculation of the value of the property is far more complex. We're not going to go into it in this stage, but what we will do is just look briefly at the fact that for the use case of loan to value, there are different stakeholders, and they're actually different people who've got an ownership activity in making sure that the definitions and the values in that data are actually good. Marketing is one of them, because one of the things they want to know is whether or not their customers have capacity for new loans or new products, and that's part of their sales function. That's what needs to happen. Risk must have it, because they must have to compare the loan either to the risk appetite that the bank currently has, or to change of circumstances because they've decided the world's going to risk it and they need to make sure they issue new loans with lower loan to value. And then finally, compliance have a mandatory regulatory obligation to submit to the Prudential Regulatory Authority or to the Dublin regulator or to the European regulators what their overall risk characteristics are. They need to know whether or not people are falling into default, whether or not loan values are, whether or not people are borrowing more, borrowing less, and that's what the government used to set policy. So all of these things stem from the fact that you and I are taking out loans on various assets. So we're going to play with loan to value. I just wanted to introduce some of those complexities to you. The other thing was I mentioned about good data is the natural outcome of an organisation that has the necessary capabilities. That's great, but the challenge with this is data is always a secondary activity, and we could always think that actually we could say the same about a customer. And if you went to a CRM seminar or anything about customer excellence, then you would have people that say, well, good customer service is the natural outcome of an organisation that has the necessary capabilities, people, systems, governance. Same with regulation. A company that's excellent at organising regulation will also have all those different things. And the art of governance is having it clear in your own mind that what you're doing is you're building a governance framework of which a good, capable organisation is part of that, but recognising there's other tensions and that there's other people with different objectives who have the same heart, that they want to improve the organisation, and you have to work with them to make them aware that data is a critical part of their delivery, and then work with them by making sure that data gets delivered or governed better, to ensure that your overall governance program is aligned with what's going on with business. So it's a key part. Data governance is an art form, bits of science, but there's a big art form behind it. We talked about the framework. There's 4 parts: executive sponsorship, the operating model, data management capabilities, and people. We're just going to touch on executive sponsorship, the operating model, and people. We'll leave data management capabilities to other webinars, other times. So let's have a look at some of the things that we should be doing within leadership policy and integration. So what would we expect to do? We're now in a situation where we are live with our governance program. We've done the first implementation. We've had some reviews of where we've got to. One of the things that we would have expected from the executive is some sort of data management policy that would have gone out, and as a result of that we will also have put out some various standards about data, and these are examples of controls. So what we're doing, I'm just going to pick out a couple of these, but the first one there is one of the principles that would be in the policy is data is part of the business. So what that means is data is part of the business, so managing data is part of managing the business. So we would expect to see different divisions within the organisation have created things like process maps and descriptions of those processes, which they should already have and probably have, but we would expect them to be annotated with the data that is relevant to the particular part of the process, so they're starting to have a really good understanding of how data relates to their part of the business. And then, very important, we would expect them to have allocated owners, and those are either the names of the process owners or they are other people within that particular business division who have accountability for making sure that data is correct. Next principle, data is understood. We'd expect people to have data definitions for loans, for value, and also for links to related attributes or the related business owners. Data should have a design. We would expect to see customer metadata with various business rules built into it, and the one I've used here, for example, is that we would expect certain data items to be mandatory. We'd expect to see that happening every time a new project comes through. Data integration, that needs standardized customer IDs, so we'd expect to see activity around standardized customer IDs. We would expect to see a list of certified golden sources. So you start with a blank list of a piece of paper that says these are my golden sources, and over time you would expect that list to get built up so that system X is the golden source for a certain type of retail customer. System Y is the golden source for certain types of corporate customers with corporate hierarchies. And these sorts of things, we expect to see lists of things starting to build up. Data quality, we'd expect to see profiling rules, and data usage, and certainly a tie-in with some GDPR and cybersecurity activities that are going on. The other thing you have to do, and you have to do this with your leadership and your senior management, is record and publish the impact of bad data. Bad data is a problem. It will cause problems, and it's no good just saying bad data is bad. We all know that. You need to express it, and how you express it depends on what's important to your organization. So a lot of organizations these days will have key objectives, and they will say, we're really focused on improving customer relationships, we're focused on managing our finances, we're focused on managing our reputation, and we also recognize that we have to make major strategic changes to our legacy systems, our organization. So what we want to know is anything that is impacting our ability to achieve our objectives. So I've got a couple of examples here. So failure to capture customer telephone numbers and email addresses, that's having an impact on our customer interaction because we can't send anti-fraud text messages to them. They're failing to reach customer. It's also impeding our ability to notify customers of potential new products that might be of interest to them. It's having a financial impact on us because it's exposing the bank to the risk of liability in the event that we didn't tell people there was a particular fraud. They're coming to us and saying, you're the bank, you should know. There may actually be an anti-money laundering breach. It will impede strategic goal of becoming a trusted bank. So that's just one example whereby we're looking at the failure to capture a customer telephone number, it's creating bad data, and the impact is expressed in a way that is relevant to the senior management. And we could go through lots of others. I did one about invalid gender codes. You can read that offline after this, and I'm sure you've got lots of your own. So the challenge is to get those issues, get them logged and express them in a way that is relevant. Then at the monthly data governance councils or whatever, they can be laid out and people can see that, and that can be used as further evidence to get more support for data governance programs. The other thing is you must sell the benefits. So when you get a real benefit, then what you want to do is express it again in the terms that management will understand. So this was about cleaning up home loans data. So the management of the organisation, to them, the big wins were the increased liquidity because mortgages that had previously been excluded could now be bought back in. That actually freed up money. It reduced the risk-weighted assets of the organisation to free up more capital. It improved the retail profit and loss. There was more accurate reporting because you didn't have to clean the data every time. You could trust the data. There was a process improvement because they'd remediated various problems that were in processes. And it's improved the customer experience because the customer now has much more clarity about the data. I'm just running through that. But basically, take the examples that you get where you do get the wins and again, express them in business terms. The operating model, let's focus on that now. So we start out with our little data attribute, the current loan to value. Now, one of the things we have to do as part of governance is to associate in a meaningful way the various people who have a stake in that particular data item. And if we don't do that, then we'll simply get duplication. So we have to manage these key data attributes. So we've got various stakeholders, marketing, risk and compliance. So the first thing we have to do is to find out who owns it from a consumer point of view. Generally, the consumer is always more interested in the data than anybody else. So we need, at the most senior level, we need accountable executives, people who aren't actually going to work on the data, but they are accountable for the processes within their area, and therefore we need them to actually take ownership, executive ownership, and so that their task is then to nominate people within the organisation to put specific checks into their job descriptions, to make sure there's certain processes adapted, to make sure there's collaboration going on with other people. So what we can do from a data governance point of view is find out who all our consumers are, and we do that by socializing, by sharing information about projects. So in this case, we've got consumer owners of head of marketing, the chief risk officer, head of compliance, and the CFO we've added in there. Now, lots of people will be producing that. So it may be we've got a COO for mortgages, or the chief operating officer for auto finance, who may actually own the branches or may own the internet sites where people are actually putting this data in. They may have the same interpretation of the definition for current loan and value and current loan to value. They may have slightly different variations. So there needs to be some arbitration around how you organize and agree what the data definition of data item is, and ultimately somebody will have to own that. So one of those people who's got a vested interest in that ownership will need to be the arbitrator or final decider of what the definition is going to be. And if there is a market difference between definitions, probably that means there's two attributes. So you'd split that out, but you do that by consensus, by negotiation and discussion. So you've got your sort of broad executive ownership model of consumers, producers and definers. Different organizations call them different things, but fundamentally you've got people who consume, people who produce, and somebody has to ultimately take a decision. They don't do the work, they just have executive accountability to make sure the work gets done in their areas. So, for example, inside the retail branch division, you've got two different types of role. You may well have a mortgage advisor who's working with customers, who's actually got to put the data in. So it's their job to actually work with this data, put it in, make sure it's correct. And they will be experts on their job. So it may be that their job description will have been expanded to have some specific data quality objectives added in, but they won't be an expert on all the different data activities that are going on. So there's probably a data SME or a champion working either within the branch or within a collection of branches within a region to provide local guidance and advice. And this would be the key practitioner, somebody who understands how data governance will work within the organization. So they're the data SME, the data champion. And you'd have the same inside the risk function, inside finance. You'll have people who actually do stuff. So the risk analyst is somebody who's actually producing the risk analytics, the risk reports. But then there will be a data SME champion. In some cases, they may be the same person. In some cases, it may be completely different. But these are different roles that you need covered. So the legend at the bottom puts these three different roles: accountable executive, person doing the actual job, and then the data SME. Now, those are looking at it from a business point of view, and of course, there is a big IT systems and data management set of responsibilities, and particularly when we get into the technology, and Joe later on will mention some of the different systems that these things might be stored on, then we need to make sure that we understand who the system owners are, who's accountable for that, so that if things go wrong with particular bits of data, we know we have within our governance system, we have the full inventory of people that we need to contact for the specific issues that we might have. So that's an example of one of the aspects of the data governance operating model. We have to make sure we know all the different parties and people that are involved in the different bits of data. There are many other parts to the operating model. We can't go through them all, but you've already seen that we need dictionary definitions and glossary. Clearly, we need collaboration and workflow to make all of this go together so we can register different users on our system and pass issues or pass referrals to them. We need structured roles and responsibilities so that workflow can work effectively and people are clear about what their roles and responsibilities are, and they're clear about the issues they have to deal with. There needs to be issue management and remediation, key aspect of the whole data governance, data quality set of activities, that we don't just have this fancy framework, we actually remediate, we actually make sure stuff gets fixed. A whole data quality and data quality set of activities. Some would be within governance, such as setting the characteristics for data quality and defining what they are, so completeness, accuracy, timeliness, comprehensiveness, these sort of things. And then the other thing is integration with the actual profiling or data quality technology that will be on the ground, that will be constantly testing data, reviewing data. So we need an integration over time with those data quality systems so that they can feed our scorecards, our dashboards, to explain to us not just what the pretty picture of what we think governance is, but they can actually then show us that for certain golden sources, that this is the quality, the level of quality, or the quality marking that we can give each of these golden sources for the different characteristics of complete, accurate, and timely. excuse me. Data lineage, massively important, more on that a bit later. And then one of the big things we have, of course, is we can't boil the ocean. So our data governance system has to have an overall prioritization, organization and control capability, so we know which projects and programs to put through. And we can scale this if we get the people right. So the technology will enable us to scale, but it's no point scaling when it's quite clear that within each different business area, we will need trained data SMEs who understand what's going on. We will need everybody who's doing their data related jobs, like a mortgage advisor or even a bank teller who's doing the filing a report about the daily activities on their bank desk. Everybody has some sort of interaction with data, so you will find over time, and most organizations are doing this now, is adapting job descriptions to make sure that data quality related activities are actually started to incorporate in this, because data is at the heart, and people are becoming more aware it's not necessarily always a specialized thing. It's in many cases it's a question of adding in data skills and data quality objectives into existing job roles. And then where it's definitely special, like a data SME who understands exactly how governance is working, or it is the CDO or the CDO's core team, these are specialized data related roles who have to work closely with the business. So we have to explain and we have to train. So we know we've got accountable executives, people doing the job, and data champions. The reality of all of this is that people make the difference. Now, business works because people make it work, and if you give them the right tools and processes and you train them, then they'll provide the motivation, the energy, and they have the ability to think and adapt and then fit things around, make things work. So when you train people, the training needs to be holistic. It must not be siloed. You really need to get people recognizing that data is an end-to-end thing. It flows from one end of the bank through to another. It comes in one side, goes out another side. What you produce is used by somebody else. What they produce is used by somebody else. Very, very interconnected. So this notion of holistic, systemic approach to data is very, very important. It needs to be tailored to the culture and values of the organization, because that's what you need to grow. And it needs to be multi-tiered. And by multi-tiered, we need specific things so that executives, we always assume that executives know what they're doing. So we need to make sure that they actually understand the implications of what data ownership means and what they need to do to make sure that ownership is implemented within their business divisions, and that they have controls in place so that they know that it has been. They don't just issue a diktat, but actually they've got monthly processes whereby they will need to check whether or not, what are the range of attributes that are available within their organization, how many of them have owners assigned, and if not, what's the plan for assigning other ones to make sure that the data is properly managed. We mentioned about these data practitioners. We need people, champions, who are in the different parts of the bank or the organization, who have a solid understanding of how data governance and data management works within the organization. They will probably be part-time data champions and full-time doing some other, or part-time doing some other job within the particular sector, within the particular region they're working on. But we need to make sure that they are fully trained and understand what to do on a normal basis, and when exceptional circumstances happen, how they need to escalate and remediate. They need to be the center of excellence within their local area. They need to be the go-to person, so if people have problems with data, they don't have to hide them. They just can go to a go-to person in their area and make sure that the matter is routed accordingly. And then finally, everybody needs to understand that data is part of the business. So you need some sort of broad, thin training for everybody, so that they understand that data's moved up the priority within the organization, and it is reasonably, really important. We do all sorts of things. So on the diagram on the right-hand side, that's different screenshots of 6 or 7 videos that we run. They're 2 minutes each, and we basically take people through how data enters the business, and we show simple little errors creeping in, and we show how those errors are magnified through risk, IT and finance by people, good people doing something slightly different, and how people working on data in slightly different ways actually causes some major conflicts further down. Now the point about that is, it used to be, if you wanted to make sure you wrote good code, one of the things you did was walk through the code before you put it in place. And with data governance, it's a good idea to do the same thing. So what we do with our videos and our workshops, we walk people through the governance processes. We get them to redesign them for their own organization and then walk those through using real data, real people, and you will be surprised how significant the improvements to your operating model will be as the result of you actually doing that. So our typical sorts of training plans, again, going at this multi-tiered basis. So we have things like data powering the organization or data at the heart, and those are probably 20-minute e-learning modules that are available that everybody has to do. Just taking people through why we do it, what the benefits are, the benefits to the customer, the benefits to the bank, and what their role is, or why they need to find out more about their role and what they do, where they should go if they need additional information. Then we have things like data practitioner foundations. That's for the SMEs across the business to make sure that they've got everything that they need, and then a whole series of tailored specialized executive briefings and seminars to help executives make the transition. And in doing it that multi-tiered way, you are providing a bonus or a support for the whole of the organization as it needs to move forward into becoming this organization with all the appropriate capabilities of people, technology, and controls, that trusted data is the natural outcome, because you understand what you're doing, because you understand what consumers need, because you're producing to what that need is. You're having data definition sorted, you've got lineage in place, and all these different things. So I think on that note, Jog, I'm going to pass control over to you, if I may.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Dennis. And yeah, that's actually, I think I can grab control here myself, so I can show the screen. Okay, show my screen.
Yeah, we have you.
Excellent. Right. Well, thank you very much for that, Dennis. So Dennis was talking quite a lot there about how to go about governing and managing and the things and the activities that are very, very important to having a good governance framework, and how to actually go about making it work. And obviously that looks at the side not just of the data, but the environment that needs to be set up in terms of the people and the support and the training and the education, etc. But underlying this, right at the beginning, as Dennis was saying, is that we have to have good and trusted data. And in our previous session, when we were presenting, we were talking about making sure that we have got very good, very trusted data that people can have faith in and be able to use that. And so one of the things that, again, previously we were talking about is the fact that the Irwin range of products provide for the governance and the management and the definition of data. And two very key things that we are very keen on making sure that we have got defined and very detailed and nailed down properly is the fact that we need to understand what our data is, and we need to catalog that and classify it so that everybody can have a homogeneous single source of definition, or the single version of the truth of what that data actually means and where does that data actually get stored. So being able to define what metadata is and being able to gain access to it and be able to have trust in the content there is very, very important. But obviously the data itself doesn't sit there in isolation. Once it's created on a database and populated into some forms, etc., it's not just going to sit there, it's going to move, and more than likely it's going to be moving between systems in there. And again, we need to understand exactly what the data itself is and where it's going, so that again we can have confidence and trust in the reports and the analyses and the actual usage of the data by the consumers in there. So we need to make sure that we do thoroughly understand what's the data, where's it going to, and what's happening to it along the way. And we covered a little bit of this when we were talking about this on the previous session in there. And again, in order to have good managed data, again, just like what Dennis was saying, is that for a good governance operating model, we need to make sure we have an understanding of the business terms and the glossary of items which are in there, the data dictionary, meaning the underlying technical data and the definition of that. But also what we need to do is to make sure that we build in quality into there and the integrations, the mappings that we have, so that we can understand what the data lineage is. And as part of that, we also looked at the roles and responsibilities and what collaboration, effort, and workflow needs to be put into place as part of the governance operating model in order to make sure that the assets that we're building up have a solid foundation and are reliable and can be verified and proven to be what they're supposed to be, and we have an approvals workflow that can take place in there. So when we're looking at that, that's what we've done in the past or on the previous session. What today's session is really going to do is to focus on extending the reuse of those assets. So yes, we've defined a glossary of terms, the data, we've done our mappings in there, we understand our lineage, we know who's doing what, but how else and where else can we take the assets that we've built and make use of them? And why do we want to do that? Well, the fact that we've got good quality metadata and understood data and the business terms, etc., means that the data can then be applied for any number of different use cases. And here are some of the top 10 reuse use cases that Owen and Sandhill have found in their experience in using data and the mappings in there. And some of those are quite obvious for data governance itself, for data quality, but also quite a lot of them do get used for data migrations, where people are replatforming and or upgrading their systems in there, and so the data needs to be migrated. And there's obviously very topical ones at the moment in terms of regulatory needs for regulatory compliance in there. And the big push also at the moment is a lot of people are going and migrating their content and the data and the systems onto cloud. And so those are big areas in which people really do need to understand what data it is, what data they want to release out, and manage that in a controlled and managed way, rather than in an ad hoc manner in there. So if we've got our data and our metadata understood, what can we do with that? Well, previously I was showing you the fact that we can understand and define what the metadata is. And one of the assets that we've got out there is what we call the Business User Portal. And what the Business User Portal does is says, these are the various assets that have been developed. And some of those you'll see on here, for example, down over here where we've got the business terms. And those business terms are going to be a linking point to where we can look at the business term, which is something which the business user community can understand, and use that as an entry point to look at the more technical content in there. But obviously, if you're more of a data architect or a data scientist or a data analyst, then you can also go in and take a look at the more technical aspects in here as well. But for our example, we're going to look, just like Dennis was looking at, some of those attributes in there, for example, like loan amount. Yeah. And we can use this portal here as a mechanism or as a way of gaining access to those underlying data and the definitions of that data in there. And as I was saying, any one of the consumers, definers, and producers can go in there and get quick and easy access to the underlying content that sits in there. So again, in the previous slides when Dennis was presenting, there was a sort of hierarchy or a definition of the various pieces of data. So if we look at this, what we're saying here is that at some point in time, there's going to be some information which is going to be collected, for example, like the original loan amount and the current loan amount. And in order to be able to use this metadata and the data itself, we need to be sure that we all have the common understanding of exactly what that means. Similarly with the loan amount, similarly with the loan to value. So we can use the models that we've created as a single source of the truth, where we're defining the underlying business terms and the technical metadata that we're interested in. Now, if you think about in this hierarchy, there's also those points of the hierarchy where we've got this sort of decomposition showing the fact that there's actually either a migration of data or a migration and transformation of data, and that might take place between different systems in there. So what does that actually mean if we're looking at this and we're trying to have data models and data definitions of the assets? Well, previously, when we were looking at this, we were defining content in there in terms of the business terms. So, for example, we've got the loan amount business term in here. And so if somebody wants to understand what that is, they can go in, take a look at that, reuse the asset. But not only reuse the asset, but also to look at any surrounding information or pertinent information which is of relevance to that particular business term. So some of those things might be regulatory compliance policies, yeah, or they might be customer policies or any other types of business rules and policies that can be relevant and related to that. But not only have we got this business term, but it is also related to these other business terms. And some of these other business terms are either going to be downstream, where we're taking the value from a loan amount, for example, and calculating the loan to value. And the upstream information that we've got in here is where we've got the original loan amount and the current loan amount being stored in there. Excuse me. So we can understand in here the various business terms that we've got and the underlying relationships in there. But obviously this is the business glossary and the business terms that we're looking at. But what we are also interested in is how does that manifest itself in the underlying technical data. And so again, for the business term, we can understand what the technical metadata is associated with that. And so that could be some sort of amount which is come from some sort of system in there, or a valuation of the properties which is coming from another system in there. So we're understanding that the business term has its relationships to other technical data and other business terms, and we can graphically model and show that. And again, you know, the great value of having a tool to help you support this is the fact that you can define it once and reuse it many, many, many times, as well as making the information available to the different producers, consumers, and creators of the content in there. Now, in the previous slide, I also showed you that, you know, we're talking about having good quality data, and one of the principles that you can follow for having good quality data is to make sure that you build quality in by design. And what we mean by that is that as we're defining the business terms, the meta data that we want, we can associate with the technical metadata things like the reference data. And by reference data, what we could, for example, be talking about is making sure that when we define the gender of a person, that we have a predefined list of values that we are that we are constrained to using in there. There might be some business policies that apply, which says that a person can only apply for a loan provided that they are under the age of 80 and over the age of 18. So you can assign these particular policies, business rules, and reference data against the business terms, the technical terms that we've got. And so that provides better levels of understanding and context when these when the data itself is being implemented within the systems in there. Previously, we also talked about the governance operating model, and as part of that, one of the things that the tool again can support you to do is to validate and verify that the data that we've got in there. And we can do this by having an approvals lifecycle against the data. So in this example, if we're defining the technical metadata, for example, like loan amount, that has got to be reviewed so that the content that's defined in there, or the metadata that's been defined in there, can be either reviewed and approved by the administrator, so he's a particular type of user, or it could be also approved by particular users who've got particular types of roles in there. So, for example, a project administrator could be a particular role that's assigned to a particular user in there. So those are the two types of people that are allowed to review this. and obviously through the approval life cycle, once it's been reviewed, it can go into a primary approval, go into stage ready for publication, and then finally publication. And at each stage in there, the various users are able to go in and put in comments and change the status of that technical data in the business terms of the catalog of content that we've got in there, so that the object itself can move through the governance lifecycle in there. So it's fully managed within there. And obviously you can only do this provided that you've got the people trained up to be able to use the tools, have an understanding of the area in which they're working in, and have an appreciation of the governance models which are in place, and obviously have got data and technical content that requires to be approved in there. So it's a level of maturity that is going on in here. And the more mature and the more confidence people have in the data, the more likely it is to be used and its scope extended outside for everybody to use more and more. And as part of the approvals workflow in there, you can also engage with others in a collaborative manner. So there is capabilities in there for users to actively engage in conversations and collaborate with one another as they are working on the content in there. So here's a bit of a screenshot of people chatting with one another within the tools so that they can discuss pertinent matters at hand, and so that they can work together on the development of content in there. And again, as the volume of technical content and the business terms and the catalogs of content builds up, you're going to get a much more richer environment in which you can work in. And with all the increasing volumes of metadata that you can capture, one of the things you can do in there is, prior to making any changes to any systems, you can use the content in there and use it to help you determine or perform impact analyses. So, for example, if we were to change or propose to change the loan amount in the system and redefine its metadata, then we can come to our tools in here and start asking questions. And one of those questions could be, what's the degree or the extent of impact if I'm likely to change this piece of data? What other areas of the data world are going to be impacted in some way? And so we can do this type of impact analysis in here. We can also do reports in here which say, well, okay, for anything which is to do with customer, what are the mappings that we've got in here, and list out the top 20 mappings that we've got in there. And these custom reports that you can write, they can focus on a specific area of interest to help you to make informed decisions for any changes to the data that you are looking to make. And so if you look at that, and let's say for our loan to value and the loan amount, we're proposing to make any changes to that, we can see that the degree of the impact analysis is going to be shown in here, where it's saying that for the loan to value, there are 5 mappings in here which are going to be impacted. And so you can see those here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and some of these relate to the data usage within reports or other parts of the systems in there. And so by looking at this, we can get an understanding of the degree of impact, and then we can also go in and see the actual mappings and the transformations of the data, so we can fully understand what the scope and the extent of any proposed changes are, as we're able to go in and look at the detailed lineage in the tool set itself. Similarly, we could go along and ask any questions on the data that we've captured in there. And for example, another example in here could be, what projects are there and what mappings do we have for those particular projects in there? And so we can see in here that there are some very, very new projects that we've got in here, and some very mature projects that have got multiple mappings in there. And thus that gives you a degree of the measure of the complexity of some of the mappings and the data that's actually being used in there. But generally speaking, the idea is that we use the tools. Once we've got a basic core set of content in there, we can build upon that. And as we build it up and increase the confidence, more and more people have trust in that, and it is more and more likely to be used and referred to. So the tools are a means to an end to help you achieve the intention of having good quality systems and good quality data. But everything else that Dennis was also talking about, the aspects of training the people and having a good governance practice in there and having champions to take you through is also just as equally important, if not more important, than having the correct tools in there. So with that in mind, I think we've got maybe about 10 minutes left. And I did mention in the chat environment that we are happy to take questions from anybody in the audience. But if you want to raise a question, you can either put it in the chat area and ask us any questions. If you don't want to put them into that, you can open or unmute yourselves and ask questions directly. And both Dennis and myself are going to be here, and we can take questions from you as we are here. So let's just give it a minute or half a minute or so and see if we've got some questions from anybody. I'm just checking in the chat board here, and it doesn't look as if we've got some questions that are coming through, which is fine. Oh, hold on. Well, I think we have. So let's see what that says. Okay, so question, comment I often get. Appreciate your perspective. It seems like a lot of work to do all of this. What is the business value to the vertical part of the organization as well as the horizontal?
It's a hard. It's the vertical and the horizontal is always quite difficult. It's when we look at the loan to value example, as an example, the benefit, the actual beneficiary is the back end functions. It's actually finance and risk and marketing to a certain extent, but it's finance and risk. Because they're regulatory and financial measures that they have to produce. And they invest a huge amount of money in generally in providing integration capabilities within their own silos. And one of the challenges that they have is that they have to make improvements in the front-end systems in order for the front-end systems to work correctly, so they don't have to do the integration of the back end. That tends to be an ongoing challenge. And it tends to be one of those issues that has to get raised to, this is really explaining the need for what an Enterprise Data Council or Enterprise Data Governance Committee does, in that you have to get the levels raised outside of the silo so that the organization as a whole, the executive, is aware that there is an issue that the front end people are causing the back end, and the back end can't fix it. All the back end can do is put sticking plaster over. So that needs to get raised across to a level of management that sits across these things. And then the organization can do a number of things. Firstly, it can either figure out it's not worth the cost, but actually if they figure there is significant business value to it, then they need to stimulate those parts of the policy so that the back end people say what it is they need more clearly. And generally it comes down to certain taxonomies that they're using. It might be a classification of risk or a classification of customer that they're using that the front end don't use. So it becomes an issue then of upgrading the reference data in the front end systems to make sure that the correct level of reporting can be done in the front end. So that removes the need for integration of the back end. So you've really got sort of management issues here, and all you can do is raise the issue if you can put quantifiable numbers on it in terms of if you fix this, it will remove a whole back-end integration issue, and what that costs in terms of manpower, that's valuable. But ultimately, it's a management decision to do that. What's the thinking around the horizontal bit? I'm struggling to think of an example there. If anybody can add anything to that one.
whilst we're waiting for that, Dennis, there were a couple of other questions also which were raised. One question that came along that said, does this integrate with the BPMN module? And if we're talking about BPM, so your business process management, Irwin have got a couple of products which do process management, and it depends what you mean by integration, but there is the ability to be able to import and export content out between the different tools. So any data that we define in the data modeling world can be imported and set up and used as part of the tool sets that we were showing you here today for metadata management. But also the same data can be shared as part of the process modules, so that you can tie together your process and data and define what happens to the data in there. So there are two modules which are available, and yes, you can import and export, though not necessarily as a direct integration within there. Now then. Oh boy, there's quite a few questions which are going on in here. I can't see all of the questions, unfortunately, in here. So let's.
We can do email follow-ups if necessary, Jog.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah, I was just going to say that we'll take a note of all the questions in here, and obviously we've got the names of the people who pose the questions, and we will follow that up within there. So there is quite a few in here. I don't think, yeah, we're definitely not going to get a chance to do that. So I think, given the fact that, yeah, we've got a few, well, very few minutes left in here. It's coming up very close to the hour. Was there anything else that you wanted to add in here, Dennis, before we hand back over to Sophie to wrap up?
No, I think we're just going to go through the summary.
Ah, yes, absolutely.
That's all right.
Okay.
So, as it says, it's the key things to always remember: data lies at the heart of the enterprise. Certainly, in terms of finance and service enterprises, and it's very, very important to think about how an organisation is going to evolve. And the reality is that data is part of what goes on within pretty much every process, and so managing data is now becoming a key part of managing the business. So people's jobs are changing and expanding, and there's going to be a constant flow between what's a specialist role and what becomes a specialist skill within a general role. An actuary is a very good example. Heavy maths, primarily focused around risk and projecting future risks. Data science, currently a separate role. A lot of actuaries are becoming data scientists, or data scientists is becoming part of actuarial, and you'll find that with a lot of sort of heavily analytic type roles. The data governance framework is a key part of this, and this is what we're trying to help encourage you to do, which is to put a framework in place which is about leadership, operating model, people, and then the underlying tools for that, as well as effective data management capabilities. And what you've got to think about as you develop and move forward on governance is not to think about just one thing, but have your own set of measures for making sure that sorry, I was just looking at the screen. So have a look at, make sure that you've got measures for how you're progressing around governance around each of those 4 quadrants. So you know whether or not you're ahead on ownership but behind on training, or ahead on training but you haven't got enough ownership out or process operating models out. So try to balance your activity across those 4 quadrants. And obviously one of those quadrants is about people, but never forget people. People are the thing that will get you over the finishing line. And of course, in this case, there is no finishing line. It's just a race without a finish line. It just goes on, and we continually evolve. So I think that's it as far as summary and conclusions, Jog. If you're on the next slide. And then contact information, if you want to contact any of us, Jog's information is the top half, and my information, EDM Works, in the bottom half. And we're happy to, we will follow up on all the questions and give you responses to those. If you want any further follow-ups about any particular part, feel free to contact us.
And finally, I was just going to add, there are a couple of events which are coming up. are sponsoring the IRM Data Governance and MDM conference in May, and you're welcome to join us there, and you can find more details on the links that are shown in there. There's also another webinar which I'm doing tomorrow, which is going to be looking at supply chain management and the use of data within there. And again, if you want to attend, you can use that link on there to register yourselves in your interest. That is tomorrow. So you'll need to be quick if you want to go and see that. And at some point in time in June, details to be confirmed, there is going to be a data modeling checkpoint, and we'll release some more details of that as things come along. But with that in mind, thank you very much for joining us. And just to repeat, the recording will be made available for the attendees after the event, as well as the presentations. And we'll take a note of the questions, and we'll follow up those with the questionnaires, and we'll get back to everybody on that. Thank you very much for your time and joining us. Thank you, and bye.
Cheers. Bye.